and welcome to Mixed Media Live. We are here 45 minutes late or something like that, but hey, we sound a lot cleaner, we look a lot better, and we've got some good conversations this week. I was hoping for our first technical difficulties free stream this week, but hey, we'll cross our fingers for next time. But I think we'll have a good collection of topics from three amazing hosts. And without further ado, I guess we'll just introduce ourselves. So Ben, you want to introduce yourself and your topic?
Sure. I'm Ben Costello. I'm a flutist and media composer. And today I'm going to be talking about the preservation and publication of film scores.
Nathan?
Hi, I am a programmer who wants to work in the video games industry. I make 3D models, and I have started composing a little bit.
And I am Irving. I am a filmmaker and media entrepreneur. I own a company called Ariella Productions. Actually, I should stop saying that. It's just Ariella. That's the name of the company. I make films, and I also do other cool stuff like starting an esports league. So watch out for that. Mixed Media is a live podcast that happens every Friday at 7 p.m. without fail. It'll be sometime around 7 p.m. And we like talking about art in general and, typically things around pop culture, maybe some more abstract things like we'll be doing today. I didn't say my topic. I'm beginning to talk about propaganda in a very loose way, more of a discussion than a particular treatment or anything like that.
I didn't say my topic either.
Oh, what are you talking about?
It was my topic is about Tomb Raider 2013 and how the game's scope and the quantity of content in it is a pretty good balance between expenditure and content.
Cool. Yeah. But at any given point during the stream, if you're wondering, hey, where can I follow these people or continue this discussion or whatever, all the links, I'm going to try to point to I always get this wrong. All the links to our socials and where you can follow us are in the bottom right-hand side of the screen there. And you should be able to follow us there. And lastly, this is a live podcast. I know a lot of people are going to be hearing this in post, but if you want to be part of the podcast, essentially part of the conversation, you have to find us live and you have to comment in the chat. That's the only way you can be in the podcast. So I would recommend that you subscribe if you're on YouTube or follow us on Twitch so you get notifications for when we do go live. Without further ado, I guess we'll just go straight into the topic since we're a little bit late today. Ben, take it away.
Sure. So like I said, I want to talk about the preservation and publication of film scores. And by that, I don't just mean like the sound. I mean the written notes, like the sheet music. So first, biggest problem is preservation. So what typically happens when a composer writes a score, first of all, when you write the score, you no longer own the rights to what you write. The studio owns it, and consequently, they also own the means of reproducing it if they choose. So they own everything that, not just the sonic portion of it, but the written portion that leads to a sonic portion. So typically, if a composer writes a score, they have their own personal copy, if they conducted the orchestra from or the musicians from, and the studio will have a copy of that. And obviously, one would hope that these things are preserved in some form. And there's two ends of that, right? The composer, has their own copy. Whether they keep it or not, that's up to them. Mostly that tends to happen. Whether the studio actually does a good job preserving it is another problem. And the answer to that is the studios generally are doing a terrible job of preserving these things. For instance, if you say wanted to go study the score for John Barry's any of his Bond films. You call up, I don't know if a studio is responsible for James Bond, but you call up the studio and let's say you somehow got access to these things. Well, you can't because all of his scores are completely lost. So no James Bond or anything by James Barry if you wanted to look at those.
So they don't save these things like digitally?
No, so mostly these are, as I'm going to get to in a second, these are like hard copies of these things. And we know that these things are not being preserved. Like the most obvious example of that is the 2008 Universal fire. Happened in Universal Studios, music storage. And in 2008, when it first came out, they underplayed what happened. They said, there's a little bit of fire in a couple of buildings, but nothing was lost or nothing of significance was lost. As an 11-year cover-up until late in 2019, where some people actually discovered the extent of what was lost. And their archives, because they did not get this fire under control and everything's just one hard copy, they lost tons of original master tapes of like people from like Elvis, really important things, to all, nameless, countless artists. What exactly is lost is not known. Scores, like physical copies of these things, up in flames. They're not investing in preserving these at all. So they're sitting around in non-fire safe warehouses, and if something happens, they're gone. Especially if the composer is also something happens to them or their copy, like with John Barry, the music is gone. Okay. So what happens to the scores that are not gone but are just sitting there in storage? Can anybody access them? The answer is basically no. All right, a few people who work in these studios' archives have access to them. They don't do anything with it. If you want to, you could potentially write some of these people if you know who has access to these things and you're their personal friend, and you might get to go see these things, which means nobody gets to see them. Okay. I'm aware of one person who has entered like the MGM archives to look at Korngold scores. One person, because he happens to have a personal friend. Otherwise, you're out of luck. Okay. And again, these composers' private collections aren't safe either, right? They're generally also not storing them in very safe places, right? Most people don't have access in their homes to the, state-of-the-art archival preservation areas. So like John Barry, his scores are gone. There are probably lots of other composers whose scores are gone. Or in the digital age, if it's not a hard copy, I mean, hopefully you back it up a number of times, but again, a lot of these scores, even in the digital age, gone in the, the abyss of internet storage.
Isn't it in the interest of the studios, though, to preserve these things, because you never know when you'll need it, like in the future for, whether it be like some sequel or like, some advertising thing, whatever it is? Wouldn't you think they would just keep it on file for something like that in a safe manner?
Yeah. So some studios, not Universal, obviously, have invested in digitizing some of these things, and normally they're doing that through Joanne Kane Music Service. But Joanne Kane's is, notorious for things leaking out of there and not being the most secure. You could also, another way of some of these things are preserved are they're being donated. Personal collections of the composers are donated to libraries. For instance, John Williams has pledged that his entire personal collection of his scores, the hard copies of these things, will go to Juilliard because he went to Juilliard as an undergraduate. Great. You think I can go look at John Williams' scores? It's never going to happen because, one, you have to be a student or a professor at Juilliard to get access to this special collection once it once he dies, and it gets sent to a special collection. So you have to be a student there or a professor, and it's in such a special collection, designated for such a special collection, that one person can go in at a time and look at like one page at a time, and they're done. Okay. Not great if you actually want to see these things and study them.
So, real quick. So, did John Williams like tell them you can't let even Juilliard students see this until I die? Is that part of like the conditions?
I guess he just announced that when he dies, his entire collection will be given to Juilliard.
Got it.
So I will never get to look at these things legally. Okay. And some of these composers, their collections are in the hands of private private publishers like Korngold. The hard copies of these things are in the MGM archives. Korngold is a composer from the late 30s and early 40s, really important for developing the Hollywood sound, not very well known today. So the physical copies are in the MGM archives, and the digitized collection is owned, I believe, by Schott publishers in Germany. Do they do anything with it? No. Did they publish it? No. Will they allow anybody else to look at these things or publish them? No. Okay. So even when these things exist, they're inaccessible. So that gets to the publication and why these things should be published and why they're not being published. So by not publishing these things, I would call that kind of a theft of knowledge in the musical world. Basically, nobody, even when these things are preserved, nobody's publishing them. So you and I do not have access to these things, although they exist. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of reasons given by these big studios as to why they do not publish these things. They first claim, that this harms their intellectual property, that harms their ability to use these things in the future if they publish them. That's not a really good excuse. One, they're already publishing for anything remotely important, in the public sphere. They're already publishing not the score itself, but they're publishing arrangements of the big tunes. Okay. You can look up anything, Star as an example. You can find a billion easy piano covers of the melodies from Star Wars or any other film that you could name off the top of your head. They're all out there, all over every publisher. Now, if you think that, as the studios claim, right, that publishing all the music from it, as it was played by the orchestra and as it's in the film, all these little tiny bits of music underneath conversations, you think that is going to harm your ability, if you publish that, it's going to harm your ability to use this material in the future, then why are you publishing already the things that actually are important, right? You can find a billion Darth Vader's theme, right? The Imperial March. That's an important theme. The music that plays while Darth Vader is strangling, force choking an Imperial officer, not published. Is that really important? No. I mean, it's important intellectually, right, for me to learn, but it's not important to, the value of the film. Okay, so really poor excuse that publishing all of the music is going to harm you when you're already publishing the important things. Okay, the other claim the studios like to give out is that people do illegal things with music. They distribute it, right? They make photocopies and hand it out.
There's an image of Kiss the Girl on the screen right now, but yeah, so it's very easy to copy.
So that's a really poor excuse because Music is already published. I mean, yes, that happens. Okay, but it happens with the things which they do publish. It happens with their arrangements of the Force theme. And obviously, I'm just using Star Wars as an example. It's the first thing coming to my head. I guess we've talked a lot about Star Wars music. But, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. So that's hardly an excuse, again, that someone's going to copy it. Of course, it'll happen, but it's already happening. Okay, all music is published. The biggest two biggest things that they claim is that there's no market for this, and there's no interest. And that is patently false. There, as I'll get to in a minute, there is a limited amount, particularly in 2020, 2021, a few scores are started to be published by basically two small publishers. And the enormous demand over the past year, especially for the score, the How to Train Your Dragon by John Powell, shows that there's an enormous market for this stuff. So to claim that nobody's going to buy it, nobody's interested in all the music, and nobody is interested in how it actually looks orchestrally. You just want the cheap piano imitation of the melody. I think that's pretty inaccurate, as I think Omni Music Publishing and Chris Siddall Music Publishing, their data, I think, would show that is not true. And the bigger the titles they're allowed to publish, the bigger the market is. When How to Train Your Dragon was released in, I want to say, November of 2020, a pretty large initial order. I think it sold out in 15 minutes. I luckily ordered it in first wave. I got in there before it sold out initially.
That's cool.
Yeah, really fantastic. So I have it literally sitting right here. Great resource. Okay, so there's obviously a market. And if I know anything about the composers that I talk to all the time, everybody wants these things. Okay. And the final claim is that the studios give is that even if you have the scores that we have on file, even if you have a copy of them, it's not what's in the film, because things change in post, right? We cut music here, we layer something here, or even what was handwritten on the handwritten score back in the days when they were handwriting scores. It says one clarinet, but the conductor decided when they're recording it to have a second clarinet double the melody. So it's not even what's in the film, so who cares? Again, that's a really lame excuse. If you just look at this How to Train Your Dragon score, okay, it's the model of what you do. You give everything, and you include a lot of notes. These, highlight these, it's highlighted on there, or there's a bracket. These 10 measures dialed out in film, music dialed back in on this word. Okay, you can make a note, as they do. Written, one clarinet. In session, recorded with two clarinets. It's not hard. They have all the notes from the session as well. Okay.
So why did they do that for How to Train Your Dragon and not for other things?
Yeah. So I'm gonna get to that in a second. But How to Train Your Dragon is kind of there's several scores that have been published, but that's one I have sitting right here, and definitely the most popular of the ones that have been published. And I think it shows you exactly why all these claims are ridiculous. Okay, this is a really big problem that these things aren't being published, because, as I said, it's theft of knowledge. If you imagine Beethoven, and Beethoven writes his Ninth Symphony, and it's just not published, it wouldn't exist, right? Nobody would know it. If you went to the concert, you heard it, and you said, "Oh, great, Beethoven, that was a great piece. I really liked it. I guess I'll never hear it again unless somebody else asks you for a copy of the score and they happen to play it, and I happen to be at that concert." If you actually wanted to study Beethoven's score, you need to look at it. Okay. Obviously, some people say, especially older people, that transcription, just listening to it and then trying to figure out what's there by using your ear, is the way to go. And I don't disagree. That's a really important skill. But it's also really important to know we want to see all of the details. Okay. It's really important not just to know what the notes are, but how the flutes are divided on this part, how the violins are divided, what kind of dynamics the composer used. And especially if you have access to, the full score, when a lot of times, the official soundtracks don't have all these, they have probably 20% of the music. It's very hard to hear all the music in the film. So if you want to know how the composer approached a problem that you might be faced with in your own film career, there's not much. It's going to be really hard for you to transcribe it while listening to the film itself, right? Because you got all the other sounds going on. The only way to get that stuff is basically to see the score. And again, it's not enough if you just say, well, we're publishing these, easy piano arrangements of the, Imperial March. It would be like saying, okay, well, Beethoven saying, well, okay, I'm going to publish only easy piano arrangement of the Ode to Joy, which is one melody in the hour and 15-minute long Ninth Symphony that I just wrote. Would anybody know it? No. All right. So by denying all of this music to every potential composer, these big studios, what they're doing is they're just preventing the next John Williams from writing great stuff for them. I mean, obviously people are still going to write things, but what are we losing by not allowing people to look at this stuff? Like I said, I really think it's a theft of knowledge, but it's sitting there. Obviously, like I said, some of it's not being preserved, but a lot of it is preserved and it's just rotting in these archives, or it's sitting on somebody's hard drive. Right? Why would you not, allow that? What kind of in artistic endeavor or artistic field survives with all of its wealth inaccessible to future people to just look at it? It truly makes no sense to me. Hans Zimmer is very against publication of these scores. So I'm gonna briefly just explain why he's wrong. Zimmer says that you should listen to everything but film music. And he also says that there's no point in looking at his scores. Okay, fine. Well, I won't look at your scores. I'm not interested in your scores, Zimmer. I'm interested in a lot of other things. His idea that he loves throwing around, that there's no point in listening or studying film music, it's ridiculous. It's not just like, should I be imitating Zimmer or Williams or whoever else, right? There's real value in, I guess how I'd say is, I think I said a little while ago, seeing how other composers approached and tackled real film problems, not just musical problems like, orchestration, right? Yes, you can go study Rimsky-Korsakov or Ravel, like classical composers, if you want to look at orchestration. But there's real value in seeing, how, when faced with this kind of scene, what kinds of approaches do different composers take on a film. And that is not possible right now. And sorry, Mr. Zimmer, but there's a lot of value in that. So I'll just end with, as I mentioned, there is a limited amount of publication by, especially recently, past year and a half, 2 years, by Omni Music Publishing and Chris Siddall Music. And what they're publishing is mainly James Horner, because James Horner's wife, I think in particular, has led this charge for all of his music to be published as much as studios allow. That's really fantastic. A lot of James Horner's music is in production right now and should be released soon. So I'm really excited about that. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody else is pushing for these things, either their own scores or their relative scores to be published. So thank you to Mrs. Horner. The other thing they're publishing are lots of scores from smaller studios that nobody really knows, or or really old things like The Wizard of Oz was published by Omni. So none of these big studios, Warner, Universal, Disney, nothing. They do not want these things for all the reasons that I talked about. You can literally find them writing those things on their website, why they don't want to publish their scores. How to Train Your Dragon is the big exception to that, and that was published. That's a DreamWorks score, and John Powell was contacted directly by the founder of Omni Music, and the director said, "John, I really would love to publish the score. It's basically the score that most people consider the best orchestral score of the 2010s." And John Powell said, I really like that idea. It's really important that people study these scores. And he pushed DreamWorks. It took him, I think, 5 years to convince DreamWorks to allow this one score to be published. Very glad that DreamWorks finally gave in to that. Like I said, it's sitting right here. I'm studying it. Been studying it since I got it in November. Really fantastic resource. So I'd like to say that there's hope, but until any of these big studios, decide to stop using these really lame excuses, there's just a lot of intellectual theft and also really tragic lack of preservation of these things. So that even if they decide to publish them, they're gone. If you want to publish all the James Bond scores, which are all fantastic, they can't because they didn't preserve them. So that's my rant. Something that I care a lot about because I really want to look at these things, and there are illegal means of doing that. People have illegal copies of these things, and they've stolen it, in the digital sense. I don't feel like that's right. I'd much rather pay a lot of money to get these things legally and have the composer actually make some money off of it as well, or their estate. But it's something that it bothered me for a very long time that this just does not happen. There's no other art form in which the art is not available to people to learn from.
Yeah, it's very peculiar when you put it that way, because I actually don't know if I understand the underlying reasons at all. Like they don't, like, it just seems like free money for them.
Exactly. Like Disney, if you go to their website and the answer is to say that it's just too much effort that nobody will ever pay for, which is ridiculous. I will pay any amount of money for like any of their scores, even things I don't like. Okay. I mean, unless they're going to charge like $10,000 for, but ask me for $500 for the score to The Little Mermaid or something. I mean, I probably will pay that much for it. And I would not be the only one. There would be lots of other people who would pay that for any of those scores.
But like children's books and other small books, like they have similar problems with copyability too, but they still sell. Like they still get published, It's kind of a weird thing.
There's definitely a lot of classics, even outside of children's books. There's definitely a lot of classics you could definitely find, easily, But like this, you still go to like a Barnes and Noble and you'll find a stack of them. You know what I'm saying? Like definitely making their money from them. So I don't know. It's very strange. It's like they don't want money in a way. I feel like that's It's a common theme in these podcasts. It's a problem because they don't want money.
Well, the thing is, the market is telling you what it wants, which is literally saying there's free money here, and they just don't do it. And part of that's because they're so giant, and this is in my opinion. But yeah,
right. I'm sure that like in the scheme of Disney's budget, if they released even something enormous like Star Wars, or if Warner Brothers released Harry Potter, it would be just like, a grain of sand in a whole bucket of sand. It'll make the money. Will it make enough for anybody to turn their heads there? Probably not. I mean, maybe that's the biggest issue. It's just, even if it's going to give them money, it's the people can't be bothered to like even think about doing it. It's not enough money for them.
This is how they've always been doing it, and so it's like, well, like no one wants to think about, oh, what if we just make a website just for this? They're like, we'll just put it off another decade because like they can, I guess.
But like in the grand scheme of things, the cost of doing this is so cheap for them, and yet it's probably one of the most, effective in terms of, costs to essentially in terms of profit. It's probably pretty good, You can even, I'm sure you can even, have some sort of, essentially like a partnership with music schools or something like that, where, you allow people access to, maybe it's like a subscription-based service, so you either give them a discount or you just let it be free entirely and the college pays for it or whatever it is for seeing these things, because I'm sure they'd be, very interested in using it in class and also letting their students use it out of class,
It's not even like much effort on their parts. Like with How to Train Your Dragon, your studio's involvement was approving it. They used John Powell's personal not hard copies. I guess it's all digital. His personal digital collection of this. He sent over the files, and Omni Music, which is its own company, did all the typesetting itself. DreamWorks didn't have to put in any effort into that. They just had to, give a check mark and say, yeah, you guys can do this. It took them 5 years to do it. It's not like Disney has to put in any effort if they want to publish Beauty and the Beast. Right? They just have to say yes, or, well, Mencken is still alive, so you could probably give them his own score, but they could, if the composer's not alive, their only other effort is to send over the files that have the scan of the thing. Like, they don't have to typeset it themselves. They don't have to edit it. They just say yes.
Yeah. They literally, I mean, in this day and age too, like, I mean, they just have to partner with some other giant like Amazon and not even talk to Amazon, just put it on Audible or whatever, some ebook publishing site, and then it's just done. It's over. They set the price and that's it, Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. Next topic?
Sure. All right, so my topic is about the game Tomb Raider 2013, and specifically about the amount of content in the game in terms of how many hours you'll be playing it for, for the price, and how I think it's a very reasonable amount compared to what I feel that a lot of modern games try to do. I think you need to strike a balance between how much content you have, because having too little and you'll be playing for 3 minutes, and having too much and your game will cost a lot of money, and it'll potentially fall flat on expectations because you're spreading your development team thin, and also you end up having an unhappy development team who has to work overtime, whatnot, all the atrocities that happen in the video game industry that I guess I'll talk about another time. But so a little background on the game Tomb Raider. It's a game made by Crystal Dynamics, who's chiefly known for making the Tomb Raider series, the modern Tomb Raider series. They didn't make the older Tomb Raider games. Tomb Raider 2013 is a reboot of the original Tomb Raider. The game is Crystal Dynamics is owned by Square Enix, a pretty big giant in the video game world. It's a mostly linear, story-driven game. It's I like to call it like the blockbuster video games, where it's like it's sort of something that's not very hard, yet I feel like everyone it's something that everyone can pretty much enjoy. It's not like a certain audience only would have fun with it. But yeah, it's not generic. It's definitely a fun time. Whilst being sort of simple, easy to understand, anyone can pick it up and just figure it out. So yeah, firstly, I'm going to talk about some bad examples of what I mean by having too much content. So I think if you think about recent history and you think about games that have had like the worst reception, I think the two that come to mind are No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077. No Man's Sky being a game that claimed that it could generate 18 quintillion unique planets in its world. Clearly, you can see the scope is quite large. They claim to do this via random generation, which is a procedural generation, which is a way that games like Minecraft, for example, are able to create huge worlds at such a cheap development cost. And you can do that, but 18 quintillion is quite a lot. And as expected, the game sort of flopped at release due to the lack of features, probably because the development team was working on many other things that they promised, potentially going too much content-wise. I will say, though, the game apparently has redeemed itself. I haven't actually seen any recent footage of it, but I know that the game is no longer considered garbage. So yeah, and perhaps the biggest upset of gaming history, Cyberpunk 2077. You can tell where the money went and where the money did not go. There was definitely an emphasis on the wrong kinds of things. I feel it fell into the common trap of we must have an open world setting in our modern games. The world is quite beautiful. I'd say the design is really good, and clearly that costs a lot of money. And I think that's okay if the game warrants it, which I feel like Cyberpunk 2077 does not. The game doesn't actually leverage that much the open world setting it's in. You do drive from point A to point B, but at the end of the day, they definitely have to take away from core parts of the game, such as quality assurance, for example. The game is potentially the most buggy thing I've ever seen. Non-ray trace graphics are not good, in my opinion, on the game. They definitely chose the wrong place to put their money, and that's because they decided to go for more content in the form of a bigger world. Now, I think some okay examples of an appropriate amount of content would be GTA 5. As much as I do criticize the game for having very boring missions oftentimes, I do think that the game does what they do a lot better than other games like Cyberpunk 2077. The open world aspect of the game is actually warranted, I feel. You actually do use it. For example, in a car race, you'll be racing across the city, or in a case like potentially you need to chase down another car or whatever it is, driving around actually makes sense in a large city. I don't think it's the best example, however, because I still feel it's too large. There are definitely large sections of the city that are unused by the time you end the game. You might have driven through there once, potentially taking a wrong turn, or just trying to see what's there, but the game didn't actually use them in any meaningful way. I know that a lot of people might say that you need the open world because it's immersion breaking, and I'd point at Tomb Raider 2013, which I think is perfectly immersive for what it is, despite being a very linear, smaller map. Relatively speaking, the map isn't actually that small, but relative to what I'm talking about. Another okay example would be Ghost Recon Breakpoint. And perhaps many of the Ghost Recons, but I'm just most familiar with Breakpoint. The game has a lot of content in terms of its map size, which I think is actually useful for it. Yet I feel like everything else is pretty monotonous. You do the same thing over and over again, more or less. There's not that much content in those regards, and I wish they would spend more time on that part of the game rather than making a huge map. Because at the end of the day, the missions you do are in isolated positions. There isn't much of a difference between driving from point A to point B and just letting a loading screen happen in this scenario where not much happens in between going to different levels. the reason why it's different than, say, Cyberpunk is because things actually do happen on occasion, and it's actually kind of cool. But I feel like it doesn't happen enough where I would prefer that over the main gameplay being strengthened. And some good examples are, of course, Tomb Raider 2013, where I felt that the game left me at the end with some room to explore more of the map, yet I never felt like, there was like a lot more to explore. I felt like the developers put in just enough stuff in the game where I could have explored more if I wanted to. I could have done the side tombs you can raid and whatever. I could have done them all. But I missed a few, and I thought that was all right. That's what I wanted to do. And I didn't feel like there were, 3,000 more tombs that needed to be raided if I wanted to, Otherwise, no one's going to get to that, and it's just wasted effort on the part of the development team. And that's not to say that an open world game can't work. I think a game like the Elder Scrolls series is a very good example. The open world aspect is definitely integral to the story, and the fact that much of what you do is your choice. Where you go is your choice. If you want to do plan A versus plan B, you need to head to a different location, and that makes sense. I think that is something where immersion actually is something that factors in, because you could have a button that says, do you want to do A or do you want to do B, and it teleports you into some arena that simulates each thing. But I think that is something that would definitely be immersion breaking, whereas just not driving to somewhere where you have to go is something that I find not that bad in terms of immersion. And for the length of the game is 11.5 hours. Tomb Raider 2013, I mean. A lot of games try to go longer than that. Tomb Raider is a pretty short game in terms of modern standards. It's actually very short in terms of modern standards. I think that's all right for what you get. When I think about it, let's say Tomb Raider comes out at $60. You're paying $60 for about 12 hours, which would be how much it would cost you for my math just $60 gets you 12 hours, whereas you go to a movie and the tickets, how much do movie tickets cost?
Depends on the location. No, it's more expensive than that. It's usually 10, 15, 20, depends on the time and location.
Yeah, okay, I guess you 2 hours. So this actually brings you up to about the same amount of time in terms of how long you'll be spending. I guess movies vary in length, but roughly speaking, you get around there. And I don't think anyone would say that that's an unreasonable price, given how much effort was put into the game. It's definitely a hard craft. I feel like Tomb Raider is definitely one of those games that has a lot of passion behind it, and it's something that deserves more than 2 cents per hour. Unlike many other games where I feel like they fall flat, in part because they try to stretch their content so much just to reach the hour limit that they want. They want their 30 hours of gameplay at $60, which, sure, but then you sort of remove the art aspect of it because you're just trying to put things in the game for the sake of putting things in the game. And I think a lot of concern might be that people want this. People want open world games. People want long games. But if you look at the most popular games, that's not the truth at all. So, if you look at, for example, the most popular Steam games currently, you'll find consistently, for years, you'll find that CSGO, Dota 2, and Team Fortress 2 have been on the top forever, since the dawn of time, pretty much. Those games in scope are, especially CSGO, is one of the most limiting games. It's definitely not complicated at all. But when you look at games that are not as well received like No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk, you realize that it's actually not that big of a deal to a lot of people, I think. And you could say that GTA 5 received a lot of good reception, and you might be saying, well, it's a modern game, and we need to keep doing what people want. CSGO, Dota 2, TF2 are old games, but I think it's just more of a testament towards how good it is. CSGO came out in 2012, Dota 2 came out in 2013, TF2 came out in 2007, and those games are still amongst the most popular games ever. That's pretty crazy. They're beating GTA, which came out in 2013. So I don't think you can, make the time comparison in that open world games are just more modern. Look at the top 10 games currently being played on Steam at this current moment. You have, as I said, the 3 Counter-Strike, Dota 2, Team Fortress 2. You also have Rust, Apex Legends, Valheim, Rocket League, PUBG, and Rainbow Six Siege. Some of those games are open world, like Rust and Apex Legends. Rust doesn't have that many maps. Does it have one map? I think it might have one map, actually, which is not as much content as something like GTA has. GTA is definitely a much more dense, even if the map is smaller, it's a lot more dense. It's definitely a lot harder of a thing to make, whereas Rust takes place in a wasteland. It's just rocks. It's not as big of a deal to create that sort of environment. Apex Legends, I feel like the game definitely warrants it. It's a battle royale. I don't really know how you play a battle royale in a non-open world environment. That's kind of the name of the game, so that's fine. But look at a game like Rocket League. The amount of content in that game is minuscule. You're doing the same exact thing every single game. You have 3v3s, you have 2v2s, you have 1v1s. Those are the main 3 game modes, but they are the same, except that you have more cars and less cars in the game. Yet it still manages to be number 7 currently on the most played games. If you look at the most played games of all time, you'll see Cyberpunk 2077, which is not there anymore, probably because it flopped really bad. You'll see things like Among Us, right? Like the map, the content is really like 0 content in that game, actually. But that's fine because you don't need all the content in the world to make the game fun. You'll see something like Fallout 4 there as well, because I think that, once again, like the Elder Scrolls, the open world nature is actually integral to the game at hand. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel like I talked a lot more about open world games and examples rather than Tomb Raider, but I realized as I was writing these notes out, that's probably really more the point I want to get at, is that not every game needs to be open world. Not every game needs to have 60 hours of content, 30 hours of content to be a good game. You can have a game like Tomb Raider, which is 11.5 hours of content approximately, and it's one of the most fun experiences I've ever had playing a game. It was definitely an eye-opener as to, I thought linear sort of storytelling games were sort of not good, the thing of the past, because we didn't have the technology to make big games back then. When I played that, I realized that's not actually the case. It's really just it seems that people are unwilling to make smaller games now with good stories. You have linear story driven games like the Battlefield campaign, but who actually likes that? It's maybe decent at best, but it's that's not the main attraction of the game. I wish I feel like the linear story-driven game is sort of dying out, unfortunately, especially in the AAA scene, where they have the most resources to move around, create the best games, create the most well-made products. But instead, they're making just heaps of garbage. That's just a lot of it, though. It's like, as long as it's a lot, it's okay in their book. And yeah, that's my thing.
Now, do gamers, I don't know what the general vibe is around open world games, but is it that the gamers themselves are sort of entranced by open world games too, or?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at open world games and think, like, when they see that in the trailer or whatever, it's just open world, they're like, wow, this is cool. I feel like the cool factor has died out a bit, as it's not as big of a novelty anymore as more game companies are doing it. But I feel the general sentiment I get is that they think it's cool, which it is, but they don't understand the detriments that it might bring about. Whenever I see an open world game, I'm immediately skeptical, unless it's procedurally generated, because that's cheaper. I'm immediately like, okay, well, does the gameplay actually warrant it? If not, what are we losing out on because you had to make it open world, because you had to add hours or whatever? So yeah, I feel like the average person probably doesn't realize this, and I understand why. It's not something that may be immediately apparent unless you're trying to, you're studying video games and you're trying to figure out, like, how do I make a good video game myself? Like, I want to, someday.
Is there like a number that you've heard these big game companies throw around in terms of total hours of content they are generally shooting for?
What's interesting is that they don't tend to actually market by saying how many hours of content a game has. Usually this is something that the players sort of figure out themselves, and then you get numbers thrown online, and then you sort of average it, and you're like, yeah, that's probably around the average person's experience. Probably because the hours actually range pretty widely depending on what kind of player you are. Some people take it a lot slower. Some people like to complete every single side mission possible, which will take the 11.5 hours of Tomb Raider and definitely extend it a couple hours. Or you can, just ignore all the side content and just blast through the main missions, and that'll make the 11.5 hours shorter. So they don't tend to advertise with that in mind. They'll just say open world probably, and you sort of get the idea.
But do the developers themselves are they aiming for like a rough number though, or is that
not as far as I'm aware? I think it's just more is better a lot of the times for them. Just how many hours can we squeeze without making this absolutely horrible? Which I mean, in Cyberpunk's case, it was still absolutely horrible, but whatever.
What do you think about like Skyrim? Because that's like an interesting case where like
that's what I did mention that before with the Elder Scrolls, since that's the latest game.
Elder Scrolls, yeah. I
didn't connect it. I always forget that it's in a series because there hasn't been a new Elder Scrolls game in forever, and I always think, oh, it's just Skyrim, right? That's the only one. I'm like, no, that's a series. They just haven't come out with one in a long time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good case of like an open world game that actually uses that correctly. And maybe that's because it's an older game, and back then they weren't obsessed with the idea of big world equals good.
Yeah, it's almost like big Skyrim. It is open world in the sense that you can go anywhere, but like at any given time. But like, there's not really a point in going anywhere in any given time other than the immersive factor of going anywhere. The fact that you can go anywhere. It's like the idea that you can go off and do a side mission and whenever you want, or like go off and explore the wilderness is like immersive because you're not on rails. But like it's not like I haven't played Skyrim for like millions of hours or anything, but like from the few hours that I have played, you still feel like you're guided through the story, which I mean the game still has control over you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference.
How about Pokemon? Is that a good example of like? I mean, that's an much older game too.
Yeah, that's it is open world. Huh? That's an interesting case. I actually have never played Pokemon ever. I've only watched people play it, which is interesting. But it's a good case. I'm not quite certain. I definitely am not familiar enough with the game. I know a lot of people are like, how? It's Pokemon, but I'm not actually that familiar with the game. But I mean, personally, from what I've seen, I would wager to say that much of the game design isn't actually that great, and so I'm kind of skeptical about the open world aspect. I do think open worldness does sometimes help in the feeling of exploration and stuff like that, such as in the Elder Scrolls. It might help a bit with that. And so if that's what they're going for with Pokemon, then I would understand it. So, yeah. And also something that I didn't say, which is irrelevant, but if you think about, the most popular games ever, the household names, think of games like Mario, for example, all right? It's not open world in that way, in that you can leave, the maps may be large, but they're not like open world large, they're not like I think what defines an open world is that you can stray from the main mission, what I'm saying, and go somewhere else. In Mario, you're just stuck in the one spot and you need to do the thing, same thing with like Tetris, right? Pong, the games that everyone knows, pinball, those are all on rails. Like, you just need to do the thing. Games, there's nothing else you can do. You just need to do the one thing and do it, because that's the fun part, is the actual game. That's what you're here for. Everything else is just sort of an embellishment. Sometimes it helps. In the case of Elder Scrolls, sometimes it's just meaningless, and it detracts from the rest of the game because the development team has to do that instead of the actual important stuff. Well,
speaking of embellishments. Transition.
Transition.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to talk about propaganda. Now, I wish I really did intend on, I'm about to throw up an image on the screen and it's going to be spicy, but But like, you know, the topic of propaganda, I think, is very interesting on like a art philosophy sort of level, because a lot of it has, you know, bleeds into arts. Of course, you can have propaganda that's like a radio message or something like that, and that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when it intersects with art. What the heck is it? Is it a thing, or is it a term that we throw around because it has a negative connotation to smear certain things that we disagree with? I don't have a fully developed opinion on it, but my initial gut feeling is I feel like it is a thing, you know. I feel like I can sort of point to examples of it, but then when I try to make a sort of rule as to what it is or means, what it involves, I struggle, because then it either excludes too many things or accepts too many things into its definition. So, for example, the image below, you know, that is an image generated for the Obama campaign. This was made for the particular, I actually forget which election it was, but it's not the full image. At the bottom it says in big letters, hope. And it's the right angle. It's got the right colors. It is just a beautiful piece of what I would say is essentially propaganda, because, you know, well, the because is the hard part, right? And, you know, it doesn't matter that it's a Barack Obama. You know, if anyone were to create an image like this, I would say, you know, it kind of feels like, you know, propaganda, because it's associating those ideas in a very strong way, the hope and the way the image is framed, and it's not really creating an argument, really. It's just kind of by almost force of presentation is sort of giving you that sentiment. But I don't like that definition because it doesn't really work. So yeah, I have a ton of examples, but before I go through, I would just want to ask you guys what you guys think propaganda is, if you guys have any thoughts.
My initial thought, which, you know, just came into my head, I can't say if this is, you know, I didn't give it much thought actually, but just if we're, you know, thinking about how propaganda would relate to art, and my initial thought was propaganda would be some art where the message detracts from the art itself. I don't know if that's actually, you know, a thing, as just what came into my brain immediately when I was thinking about that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's when I usually care about it, because I'm like, okay, I can feel the voice of the propagandist coming through the art form, almost in spite of the art. You know, it's kind of, the art becomes secondary. But I don't know. What do you think, Ben?
Yeah, so, you know, in college I studied quite a bit of Russian literature and Russian music, particularly Soviet stuff, and that's obviously an enormous topic. The use of music, and all the arts as propaganda, but it is kind of hard to define what that means. You know, I can think of a lot of examples of different, you know, composers writing what I would call propagandistic music, but I suppose the easiest thing to say about it is that it generally is art that feels like the message is dictated from outside, and the art is meant is you're given a message, and the art is meant to fit the message instead of the message kind of growing organically with the art.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me too. That both of what you guys said kind of fit the feeling that I feel whenever I feel like that's propaganda on the screen, you know, in terms of films and cinema and TV and stuff like that, which is, you know, my area. The definitions from dictionaries are interesting because they're not consistent at all. They tend to they don't really give you clarity, but I'll read some of them. Dictionary Britannica. So it says propaganda is the more or less systemic effort to manipulate other people's beliefs, attitudes, or actions by means of symbols, words, gestures, banners, monuments, etc. And that's its definition, which very broad. Not, I mean, in a way, a lot of arts are there for the particular purpose of manipulating others, and the word systemic is not necessary. I don't think it has to be systemic for me to feel like it's propaganda. Although that definitely, things that are systemic tend to be higher in awareness, in our daily lives. But that's not necessarily necessary for what I would think of as propaganda. Dictionary.com says information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, institution, nation, deliberate spreading of such information, rumors, etc. Which again, there are lots of things that are... So here's one example that I think is very hard to square with my feeling about propaganda. It's simply advertising. Like, advertising can fit many of these kinds of definitions because its literal purpose is sometimes it is to literally attack another company or a group of people or a type of people, whatever, or it's trying to help that company. But there's something different when, and maybe this is just a cultural thing, and I'd love to get your guys' thoughts, but there's something different about my instinct is it's not a cultural thing, but there's something different about Coca-Cola having a feel-good commercial accompanied by like the sound of a Coca-Cola bottle opening, the image of the beautiful drink that you want to just reach out and grab. That's not the same to me as like, more typical forms of propaganda that we would think about. So it is very complicated. Here, I'll put some examples up. Here's one piece that is apparently extremely famous, but I've actually never seen it before. I'm sure it's in some history textbooks. But this is from World War II, as a lot of examples are. And it's an image, so this is not, in the domain that I'm talking about at large, but I think it illustrates a lot. And one of the things it illustrates is that this is definitely a piece of art, right? It's a drawing. It's very well done. Like if I take my time to sit there and analyze what's going on and what the artist did to convey the message, it was done extremely well. The person is not only just conveying this extreme like agony, but the reach for like help is not. It's accusatory. It combines like the natural human like I need help with pointing at the viewer directly as someone talked, someone betrayed me, and I think the idea is that this guy is in a sinking ship or something like that, and someone talked to a spy about the location of the ship or something like that. It's extremely effective, and the goal is the goal bad? No, but this is very clearly propaganda to me. Well, I mean, I don't know the full context of this image, so I don't know about the total goal of this image, so it could be bad. But from the limited context I have, saving people from sinking ships, from people talking when they're not supposed to talk, it's not inherently bad. But this is an art taking on sort of like a propagandized form. Does that make sense? I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's interesting because I don't think I'm trying to apply my definition to it of it's like art, but the message detracts from it. But I mean, the art is the message in this case. There's no difference in this case. It's not like a movie where some like morale at the end of it was placed that may have detracted from the story. This is the entire. It's like, I don't know. I guess this kind of goes with what Ben was saying, where sort of like this is like it was made for the message and not the other way around. It was, you know, the message was there first, and then they had to make an art piece on top of it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me too. But then, so then, is propaganda like an inherently negative term then? Because the message, you know, it goes back. This is kind of a form of advertising we're seeing on the screen, essentially. You know, it's interesting because for me, propaganda is negatively associated with art. So if I come across a film and I feel like the filmmaker or institution behind the film is, even if I agree with the message, I usually it will annoy me beyond belief. And like I said, it has nothing to do with agree or disagree, because there are plenty of films that I definitely disagree with the premise of the film. You know, couldn't disagree more. But I think are amazingly done film, and it feels honest. And like that's the word I keep coming back to. Is it an honest expression or not? You know, is the artist being true to their art form, to the medium, and to themselves, like their own integrity? But somehow I can feel that through the art, and I found that very, very interesting. Here, I'll throw up another piece. Let's see.
Well, with that sort of definition, what would you say about what we just saw?
Well, with that definition, maybe it's not propaganda per se. I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't have an answer to that, because like the artist was probably just contracted. It doesn't really I'm not offended that the artist made that, you know, like, you know, it just, maybe that's just me associating that image with a lot of other propaganda. And so maybe that's more of like an advertisement or PSA or something like that. Because the relationship between the art and the artist is transparent. Like, you know, it doesn't feel like I'm being sold like a bill of goods or something like that, you know? Whereas like if sometimes I'll watch a movie and there'll be, I'm gonna have to mention Marvel, but later, but you know, there'll be a scene and it'll be like, okay, no, this scene is here because not because it's the best thing for the film. This scene is here because you wanted to shout at me for a moment. Agree or disagree? Yeah.
Yeah, I would. So maybe for me, I guess what's challenging about like the last image is that with images in general, I'm just like, I mean, I feel like I can have some appreciation of like visual art, but I'm not necessarily a good judge, I don't think, of like sincerity in a visual, you know, drawn, painted medium, where like if I compare like Soviet musical propaganda and artistic, I mean, the visual art, it doesn't feel empty to me. And obviously that's what they're going for. I think they want that effect. But if I listen to the music that's also, you know, obviously propaganda, it feels empty to me. And I don't know whether like that, me being able to judge sincerity, it just has something to do with me like being more familiar with actual sincere music than sincere painting or drawing. I wonder if that's part of it. I think at least for me that's my kind of understanding of my own reading of like the visual propaganda versus like Shostakovich's Song of the Forest kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because like in, you know, the video games industry, there's not this is not as big of a thing trying to push a message to the audience, especially when it's impossible for some games because they don't have stories, you know. Like Rocket League, for example, you're playing car soccer. There's no message you can push in that, you know. And for the very few story, you know, driven games I've seen, I mean, the only one that stands out to me as a potentially very contrived story for the purpose of conveying something would be Life is Strange. Otherwise, I can't really think of any story games that are clearly trying to tell you something. Just kind of like, Tomb Raider, for example, is like, here's a fun story. It's not. I couldn't really tell you any sort of morale that's really trying to push. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense. Actually, I think the idea of sincerity is actually a good one. Like that makes the judge, and yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. That I'm able to judge that the best in, my own medium when I watch films and TV. I can judge that. I can feel it very distinctly. Whether this scene was constructed, or this moment, this line, whatever, this character was constructed to pass on some point that does not belong to the piece of art that is in.
I have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's about sincerity, and this is kind of a two-parter. So one, is that inherently bad to be insincere about what you're trying to say? And if so, is it okay to take part in things that you don't believe as someone who's not the head person? So, for example, if I'm composing for a game, but the game is pushing a message I don't agree with, is that fine? Is that assuming that it's inherently bad to be insincere about whatever, which sounds like it would be, but yeah.
Yeah, for me it's like I think it is kind of like a transparency thing for sure. It's like if the connection between the art and the artist is simply that of a contracted laborer, and that's the way it's presented to me, and not as like a pouring out of the heart or the art form or something like that, then that might be propaganda on the corporation side or whatever entity created the thing, but I wouldn't say the artist was a propagandist necessarily. They just kind of took a job.
You say that whatever her name is for Captain Marvel will be a propagandist.
Who?
I don't know. Whatever her name is, who the actress for Captain Marvel?
Brie Larson?
Yeah, her.
That's a good question. I mean, is
the question was she insincere?
Right.
Yeah, was she insincere in sort of saying whatever she said in for example interviews or something, right? That'd be the question.
Yeah, actually, in that context, in the Captain Marvel context, I would say yeah, she probably is, because like her art form is acting. She pretended essentially to pour herself out for a character and presented it as if it was going to be this big thing, but she knew. And not only that did she not know, but even in the act of acting on the Avengers set, she didn't even know who her character was. Like that has to be disingenuous, that there's no, and then to turn around and say, I'm Oscar-winning Brie Larson and I participated in this amazing piece of art, and I go and see that movie now, I'm like, that feels like propaganda to me, because like there's no way this character could have been the product of your sincere artistic work. Like it's just not, but you presented it to me that way. Whereas like if Brie Larson was in like a Coca-Cola ad, and it's she doesn't really like Coca-Cola that much. Actually, see that is insincere. I don't know, and there might be a problem with that. I don't know. It's kind of it's an interesting thing, but like, well, let's say she did like Coca-Cola, but it's not her favorite drink, but she exaggerates because that's her job. That doesn't really bother me. I don't know, but
well, wouldn't her job be wouldn't she be lying there? It wouldn't be like that's like, all right.
But she's an actress, right? Like,
I guess this is whether you are attempting to actually say this is actually my favorite thing when it's not, or whether you're just you're just saying the script and you're not actually it's like it's about whether you intend for it to actually reflect you or not, and whether it does actually reflect you or not. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's interesting though, because for actors it rarely reflects them, right? Like it's not necessarily about whether the piece itself reflects what they believe or their character reflects anything about them. It's more like, did they, with the sincerity of an artist, did they approach this project? And that's impossible for Brie Larson to have done because she didn't know who her character was. But then she could have, if she said, like from the beginning, oh, this was a lulz project for me, I guess it wouldn't bother me so much, because it's like she just kind of did a job. I don't know if that makes sense. That might be incoherent, but yeah. To me, that would be like, okay, that's Disney's propaganda, creating that character. I don't know what you guys think, but yeah. So I think so. In the discussion that we've had, like the image that we have on the screen here is an anti-slavery image, which, and I think we're kind of getting at something in the sense that like maybe I just can't tell intent from things like this, and maybe that's me being too disconnected from painting and those kinds of things. This is not an advertisement. This is not something you would find like, necessarily, on some billboard, right? This is in the context. It was created for the purpose of convincing. It's very straight. It's almost like a political cartoon, right? Like no one says political cartoons are propaganda, no matter what message they're putting forth, because I feel like the political cartoon is transparent about what it is. Like that is the medium of a political cartoon. It's part of it, that is the culture political cartoons inhabit, right? Is that they have very strong, deliberate messages, and maybe the sincerity plus the transparency of it. I don't know, and maybe it's easier if you understand the art form to see through people's insincerity. I would definitely be sympathetic to both those ideas. And then I'll put up the scene in question that includes Miss Captain Marvel and company. This scene in the movie where Captain Marvel arrives and all the women heroes happen to be in the same exact spot and rising up. I don't care what you believe. That did not make. I'm pretty sure in the theater people laughed when that happened, and I'm sure many of those people ended up cheering right after, because it's ridiculous. Like, it doesn't occupy the film properly. It's the film was not presenting itself in a way that would lend to this choice. It just was a choice because there was a message that had to be conveyed at some point in the film, or as many times in the film as possible, or whatever the discussion in the writing room was, or on whatever level it happened. It doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. This scene sucks. It actually is objectively bad. Like it's immersion ejecting from a movie that's in the genre of immersive movies, at least somewhat. It's not like a cartoony movie in that sense, that you would expect to see campy moments like that. It's a very campy genre, but it's not like that. That's a different thing. It doesn't break the fourth wall like that, which is exactly what this scene does. It's like everyone knows when they see that this is the film trying to shout something at you. It's not the film speaking its own language. So I think that kind of fits the transparency and the sort of sincerity aspects of it, because this is insincere, as insincere as you could possibly get to me. Maybe not for the actors, but definitely for the writers. 100%. And I'm going to be extremely spicy now, as I am going to... this is going to be in my news for the day as well, because, I'm not just a filmmaker, I'm a media person, and this definitely is stuff that concerns me as the sort of new media comes comes around and is kind of battling the titans of old. There are some titans that are definitely, for people who are trying to start their own platforms, for people who are trying to innovate in media. There are some monopolies, my favorite topic, who are hogging up space, and they are essentially propagandists, and they're the only reason that they're able to survive, because I think it's obvious to, well, it's not only obvious, it shows in their revenue numbers declining on a rapid pace, even from just middle America type people, average people. But an undercover video was dropped recently, and it shows a CNN producer basically defining what propaganda is and saying that they are propaganda. So I'll put the slide up. I can't see it myself because my camera's covering it. But he basically says, what is propaganda? They kind of have this philosophical conversation back and forth like we've been having about like, okay, what is propaganda? And then he ends up saying, basically, we have a message that's insincere and we'll make the stories fit the message. That makes sense to me, because if a reporter were to make a mistake, right, and or even if it was a lack of due diligence, that to me wouldn't be an issue of propaganda. That would be an issue of quality or care or whatever. Again, I don't think it has to do with institutions or like what it's connected to. It has to do with the transparency. If they were transparent about their agenda, because they make their broadcast about being the most trusted name in news or like, whatever, that is the way that they present themselves. Yet what they actually are, like, for example, if let's say, like, I have a lot less problem with both MSNBC and Fox News, because they're honest with their audience as to what they are. You consume them knowing what you're getting. They're even their own advertisements for themselves, advertise the stances that they bring to the table when they're broadcasting, and that's who they are. But this is different, because you are pretending to be something that you're not, and there's sort of like there's a thing that everyone is organized to fit everything to, if that makes sense. Yeah. And that's my segment.
Dang, really just... Wow.
Yeah. You can Google it. Yeah, you can Google it if you want, but the context is there's just a whole conversation.
Can you drop a link somewhere, maybe in the description or something?
Yeah, I'll do it after the stream.
Yeah.
But like, it's an undeniable context. The guy is literally like talking to someone he thinks he's on a date with, and he and the little woman literally asks, "Isn't that like propaganda?" And then he like goes into the what is propaganda? And he's like, and then
just spill the beans.
Then he's just like, honestly, because Twitch is sensitive, so I'm gonna put this in certain terms. He was discussing the fact that despite the anxiety that it was causing, the known anxiety and the known rooting for negative effects, such as the deaths of people from a certain a thing that we've been dealing with for over a year now, despite the negative effects on people's mental health, and as well as the how should I put this? It caused people to root for the negative effects of people because it would mean more money and essentially that, and to fit certain stories and hopefully encourage negative outcomes because it meant more money and more attention, and fitting a certain thing. You can just look at the video. That's all I'll say. But it's It doesn't feel good. Let's put it that way. But this is the thing. It's like this just bothers me across the board. It's like, and it's any kind of person can do it. And then to me, it's just like, to me, it's obvious, especially in my own medium when it's happening. And it's just offensive because, like, okay, one of my favorite films ever is Silence. I don't agree with the premise of Silence at all. Not even like, not remotely. But it was done with sincerity. I don't know. Ben has seen it, I think. I don't know if he would agree. Oh, you haven't seen it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. The premise of the film, I do not agree with at all. But Martin Scorsese is being gloriously philosophical, meditative, and sincere with what he's trying to explore for himself and for his audience. And that I can respect, even if I don't respect, or if not respect, I should say, even if I don't agree with the premise of the movie whatsoever. I couldn't disagree more. But it's a great film, and it's not propaganda. Yeah. So with that news, do we have news this week, or are we?
Yeah, I do. If you, yeah. So this time, I'm going to be talking about a game that came out about a week ago that I think is very interesting because more innovative than a lot of the other games that have come out recently. So this game requires that you have a webcam, as far as I know. At least it would only make sense to me with the webcam. So the way it works is you actually play the game using the blinking of your eyes. So it's a story. So the premise of the game is that you have died or whatever, and you're being sent to the afterlife. And on your way, you are looking back at your prior memories of when you were alive and whatnot. Right. And so as you go through this, it's sort of a narrative adventure where you can blink at certain locations, and these can cause different things to happen in the game. This is very interesting because it's a whole new type of control that has never been explored before. And I feel like we need more of this, more interesting things instead of using a lot of standard practices, which is not necessarily bad. They're tested and work well. A mouse and keyboard works pretty well, but I'm just glad to see a game like this that's doing very well, has a lot of good reviews, doing very well. That's trying something new. I think it's a very interesting concept. One of the more interesting things that I found about it is that one of the things is that since you can't keep your eyes open forever, you are forced to blink. And what this can do is you might be in a memory that you find pleasurable as a player, and you are forced to keep your eyes open to experience whatever you're trying to experience. And this very much probably immerses you in the character, as the character who's dying doesn't want to escape these good memories. And so you feel a physical pain, literally, as you try to not do the same as well. Whereas certain more bad memories, you might simply just blink and go to the next one. You just don't really care about it. If you're wondering, the developer is called Goodbye World Games. The publisher is Skybound Games, which they make RimWorld, is it? They made something that's very big. Looking at their Steam page, they publish Telltale Games, I think. And yeah, that's my news.
Yeah, and like I said, my news is what I mentioned at the end of the segment. So, Ben.
I don't have any particular news. I'd give a brief correction to something I said last week. Apparently, for Season 7 of the Clone Wars, there were a few live musicians in the score. That he did get to use a few live musicians in seasons. Kiner did get to use a few live musicians. I don't know whether that is the case for the upcoming Bad Batch. He's doing an interview, live Zoom interview that I will be attending on Sunday, and I may ask that question if someone else doesn't ask.
All right, and so with that, anything else?
Join our Discord.
Join our Discord. Yeah, I think there are some people. At least one person is watching. So hey, one or two people who are out there watching right now.
I'm seeing 3 viewers on Twitch, and I'm one of them. So it's at least 2, right?
Oh, awesome! Yeah, that's at least 2. I'm not on Twitch right now, so Yeah, if you're out there and you enjoyed this conversation, thought it was interesting, thought it was spicy, if you want to get mad at me or get mad at any of us, you got to join our Discord. That's the way you get mad at us. That's the way you guarantee that we read your hatred. Which I'm just joking. I know you guys are we didn't say that anything that spicy. But if you want to follow us on all of our platforms, join the conversation on Discord. The link that's on the screen on the whiteboard that we didn't really use today, that will take you to where you can follow us everywhere, take you to all the links. We're now on Spotify, which is really exciting, which corresponds with our increase in audio quality. So we feel like we're on a good track. So follow us on Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. It's literally everywhere. And like I said, if you want to see a reproduction of this stream after the fact, it won't be available. This thing goes unlisted immediately. If you're on Twitch, of course, we don't do VOD on our channel. So
say VOD.
VOD.
I've never heard someone call it VOD as opposed to VOD.
VOD, yeah. Okay, sure. We don't do VOD on our channel, so in order for you to see a reproduction of the stream when we're done, you can see it for free. And the only way you can do that is to go to mixedmedia.locals.com. It is in the link on the screen. Whatever, you get the point. It's there too. And there for free, you can look at all our live stream once we're done. Yeah, but otherwise, it'll be out by Sunday, sometimes before, sometimes after, if I have a hellish time getting this done. But yeah, with that, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you next Friday at 7 p.m. Follow and subscribe. All right. See ya.
Good night.
Bye.